Good evening. My name is Sergeant Major Kane. What I'm about to tell you is sealed tighter than a coffin lid, buried under layers of false reports and psychological evaluations. I present it not as testimony, but as a warning. This is the unedited, terrifying truth of the Al-Khamis incident. I need you to understand who we were before I tell you what we became. My unit was Ghost 6. Our motto was, Beyond the Black. We handled the contingencies that the conventional military refused to acknowledge. We specialized in anomalies, things that broke physics, things that came from outside the frame of human experience. Our training wasn't just physical, it was about maintaining sanity when the world around you became actively insane. I, Kane, was the anchor of the team, the one who made the cold, necessary calls. My second in command was Specialist Reyes. He was physically immense, a veteran of 3 continents, and brutally effective, but he possessed a deep, inconvenient empathy. He was the one who kept us human. Then there was Specialist Lee. She held advanced degrees in geometry and theoretical cryptology. She was our mind, our analytical engine. She was the only person who could look at a spatial paradox and try to write an equation for it. If there was a pattern, Lee would find it. And finally, Private Martinez. Barely 21, a good kid, quiet, dependable, signed up to see the world. He was the most grounded among us, and as we would find out, the most susceptible to the infection of the unreal. The mission began like a bad joke. We were in a secure briefing room outside in Sirlik, the air thick with stale smoke and anticipation. We were staring at a high-resolution map of the Al-Khamis Exclusion Zone in central Syria, the dead zone, a desolate, politically volatile area considered a military waste bin. Then the alert, a high-priority civilian maritime distress beacon. An EPRB, emergency position indicating radio beacon. Check the coordinates, Lieutenant, I ordered, already knowing the answer. The beacon was pulsing from the center of the dead zone, 200 kilometers from the nearest coastline, or any significant body of water. The vessel type was identified, a mid-sized coastal freighter, the Odyssey. The absurdity was a trigger. When physics stops making sense, Ghost 6 is deployed. Our order was simple: investigate, find the source, and if there are survivors, execute an immediate priority alpha extraction. We flew in our armored transport, the Titan, under a bruised, pre-dawn sky. The air was unnaturally cold for the desert. Our instruments screamed about atmospheric pressure abnormalities and massive, localized magnetic fields. As we drove to the coordinates, the ground dipped abruptly into a valley that shouldn't have been there, a scar in the landscape. And there it lay, the Odyssey. Listing heavily at a 45-degree angle, the hull was deeply rusted, the paint peeling away in sheets of bloody red. Its deck was covered in genuine, foul-smelling, rotting seaweed, chunks of coral, and thick, hard barnacles. It looked like it had sunk a decade ago and been teleported inland instantaneously. The smell of brine and decay was overwhelming, a complete violation of the arid desert air. It defies logic, Sergeant Major, Reyes muttered, his hand tightening on his weapon grip. Look at the rust. That took years. How did the sea get here? And where did it go? The sand around the wreck was saturated, forming deep, black pools of brackish water that shimmered with an unnatural light. It was an impossible, hostile environment. We breached the hull. Inside, the air was stale and damp. We found the boy in the captain's cabin. Elias. He was sitting on a broken stool, 7 years old, impossibly clean despite the ruin. He was staring at the shattered comm screen, which was the silent source of the persistent SOS signal. His clothes were dry. He showed no sign of fear, grief, or even awareness. He was utterly still, radiating a deep, unsettling calm. Reyes approached slowly. Just the boy, he reported softly. He lifted Elias, holding him close to his chest. The child was warm, but his eyes were vacant, fixed on some unseen point past Reyes's shoulder. He did not react. Objective complete, I confirmed over the comms, though the knot in my gut had tightened into a fist. Let's move, Ghost 6. This place feels like a trap. We drove the Titan away from the wreck. The moment we accelerated, the intense, scouring desert wind died completely. The air went thick, silent, and heavy, like we had suddenly entered a vacuum chamber where sound traveled slowly. Kane, my GPS is cycling. Complete signal loss, Reyes reported, his voice now laced with confusion. The coordinates are jumping wildly, zeroing out, then spiking to thousands of miles away. I checked my own tactical display. The straight line to our extraction point was a meaningless scramble of numbers. We were barely 50 meters from where we'd parked, but suddenly, the horizon felt fundamentally wrong. The sand dunes were too tall, too close, like they'd been silently multiplied in size, surrounding us. The dead zone had closed its fist. Hold fast, I commanded. We navigate manually. Driver, proceed due north until we see clear desert. Push it hard. The vehicle roared, churning hard through the wet sand for what felt like 10 endless minutes. We should have covered miles, hitting dry ground. Instead, the taillights of the freighter Odyssey, the ghost wreck, blinked mockingly in the rearview mirror, exactly 50 meters behind us. We had not moved an inch. We were anchored in place. The morning stretched into a nightmare of endless repetition. The sun rose, casting a sickly, pale yellow light that seemed to drain the color and life from everything, making the desert look like a monochrome photograph. We were trapped by a spatial defiance that mocked every physical law we knew. Lee tried everything: triangulation, celestial navigation, even tethering a drone. Every single attempt to leave led us right back to the Odyssey. It's a localized, self-referential spatial loop, Sergeant Major, Lee explained, her voice tight with intellectual frustration. She was pacing furiously, clutching a broken mapping device. It's not a countermeasure, it's a geometric prison. The space around us folds back in on itself, forming an inverted sphere. The wreck is the fixed point, the 0 point that anchors the loop. We were forced to establish a defensive perimeter around the wreck. Reyes refused to put Elias down, holding him tight, talking to him constantly, anything to get a reaction. But Elias remained still, the silent, terrifying center of the paradox. As the second night fell, the air dropped below freezing, a rapid, unnatural plunge. The low, subsonic hum began again, deeper this time, vibrating deep in our bones and teeth, causing crippling nausea. Then, the desert began to writhe. The smooth, natural dunes started tearing open, erupting into structures of black, angular rock. These were colossal, jagged shapes of glassy, obsidian material that absorbed the meager light. Their angles were fundamentally wrong, not built, but grown. They leaned at impossible 130-degree angles, creating shadow lines that defied the simple position of the moon. It was a geometry that made the eyes ache and the brain struggle to process the input. These were the impossible structures of a world that never should have been, manifesting in the Syrian desert. Contact. East flank. Multiple forms. Martinez screamed, his voice dissolving into a whine. He wasn't firing at men or even solid animals. He was firing at pure conceptual horror. From the shifting, wrong-angled structures, entities began to emerge. They were not little green men, they were formless, shifting masses of light and sound, shimmering, multi-limbed reflections that seemed intensely bright but cast no practical illumination. They moved with a sudden, lurching, multi-directional grace that defied locomotion. They were extra-dimensional, feeling less like invaders and more like the raw data of a cosmic dream now made tangible. They seemed drawn by our energy signatures, or perhaps, by the intense, silent singularity that was Elias. Fire. Focus on the center mass. I roared, knowing it was useless. We emptied magazines. The 5.56 round slammed into the shimmering forms, causing the light to intensify into a painful, brief flare, like striking an invisible diamond. But the entities didn't bleed, flinch, or stop. They simply folded space, flickered, and advanced, moving with the terrifying efficiency of an invasive algorithm. They felt no pain because they were not physical. We retreated again, scrambling back toward the dubious security of the ghost wreck, realizing that every human concept of warfare had just become obsolete. The freighter Odyssey now felt less like a shipwreck and more like a tomb, its metal shell humming under the overwhelming pressure of warped reality. The constant, high-pitched metallic whine was physically painful, making concentration almost impossible. Lee was trying to set up a field generator when she stumbled, falling back against a steel bulkhead. Her scream was raw, intellectual pain. She wasn't looking at the entities outside, she was looking at the bulkhead. A moment ago, it had been a simple, riveted steel locker. Now, the wall had unzipped itself, revealing a deep, open chasm. This was not a hole, it was a window into an endless, starless, violet sky dominated by 3 massive moons, none of which were Luna. The ship's air conditioning unit was gone, replaced by a strange, obsidian structure that pulsed with a slow, mechanical rhythm, like a gigantic, alien heart being squeezed by unseen muscles. It's a localized manifestation, Kane. It's reacting to our distress. It's rearranging the interior based on our fear and confusion. Lee shrieked, scrambling backward. Reyes, clutching Elias, was hyperventilating. We need to leave. I can't breathe in here. The boy, Elias, reacted. He let out a small, dry cough, a quiet sound like dry leaves rustling in an empty room. Immediately, the obsidian structure on the wall dimmed, its strange pulse slowing, and the violet sky seemed to flicker, losing intensity. Elias was connected, controlling the intensity of the localized horror without meaning to. Martinez, who had been guarding the stern, was now staring blankly at a small pool of the black, brackish water on the deck. He was shivering uncontrollably, his eyes wide and unfocused. The water, it's not just sea salt, he mumbled, his voice dull, distant, and hauntingly calm. It tastes old. Primal. It smells of things that died before the oceans were born. The desert is weeping through time. He reached down, his curiosity outweighing his self-preservation. I need to know what it is. Martinez, stop. That's an order. I yelled, lunging forward. Before I could reach him, before Reyes could drop Elias and move, his hand sank through the surface and disappeared completely, followed by his arm, his shoulder, and then his entire body, with no ripple or splash. He didn't scream. He just vanished, like he was wiped from existence by a bad editor, leaving only the clatter of his rifle. The puddle instantly shrunk to a smear, leaving behind only dry, unsettlingly white salt. The surrounding bulkhead warped again, making the only exit door shift 6 inches to the left, trapping us momentarily, mocking our very movement. Lee checked the spot where Martinez vanished. Her analysis was chilling. The water was not water. It was a localized non-existence. A temporal conduit. We are fighting the fundamental rules of the universe, and we are losing soldiers to abstract concepts. Elias was the only thing preventing our complete dissolution. The psychic attack was now the primary threat, constant, crushing, and pervasive. It wasn't just noise, it was a tailored wave of deep, existential dread mixed with our most painful, personal memories, projected directly into the deep centers of our brains. The invisible consciousness of the anomaly was trying to break our minds. The very sand seemed to be whispering, the sound filtered through epochs of cosmic dust and suffering. You don't belong here. Give him back. He is ours. Yield the anchor. My own internal torment was absolute, the audio loop of my wife's last voicemail, the one I deleted out of self-preservation, now played incessantly in my skull. Please, don't leave. Just this one time, stay. It was compounded by the vivid, recurring image of Martinez's vacant face as he vanished. Lee, though pale and bleeding from her nose, fought the psychic noise with raw, brilliant intellect. She kept talking, trying to apply structure to the chaos. "The anomaly's intent is singular," she gasped, her hands shaking as she tried to focus. The ship wasn't carrying military cargo. It was carrying a relic, a piece of something vast and cosmic, the seed. When the ship wrecked and the crew died from the brackish, primal water, the nearby trauma activated the seed. But it needed a focus. It needed a link to this reality. It found the only pure, uncorrupted consciousness nearby, the child. She stared at Elias, who was resting against Reyes's chest. Elias is not a survivor from the wreck, he is the key to the wreck. He is the focus lens, the way this vast, unseen consciousness underneath the desert sees and maintains its reality here. He is the anchor. We understood the awful equation: we couldn't take the boy because he was the key holding the anomaly in place. If we tried to leave, the entity would follow its key, chasing us across the globe, bringing its nightmare reality with it. If we stayed, we'd all dissolve like Martinez. The mission was now critical containment. Suddenly, an undulating ribbon of pure, black energy, a high-level manifestation, squeezed itself through a ventilation shaft above Reyes. It was terrifyingly fast and focused, clearly hunting the boy. Its presence felt like a violation, stealing the oxygen from the air. It reached toward Elias, flickering like static electricity. Reyes screamed, a raw, protective sound, shielding the boy. Elias, sensing the danger, instinctively reached out a tiny hand and pressed it gently against Reyes's chest. The black ribbon entity instantly recoiled violently, its light flickering out. It tore itself in two pieces, the pieces dissolving into dark dust. "He defended you," Lee yelled, her scientific shock overwhelming her terror. "He's integrating. The boy is not just the anchor, he's becoming the entity's conscious defense system. We have to utilize this, Kane. We have to get to the core before he loses himself completely." Elias was now the shield and the sword. We had to find the source of the seed's initial power, the trigger, and sever the link without harming the boy, our only defense. With retreat impossible, I made the calculated, terrifying decision: we had to go deeper. We had to find the source of the distress beacon's residual power, the initial cargo, and neutralize it. Lee confirmed the energy signature was dropping vertically, pointing directly to the entity's core beneath the wreck. "Gear up," I ordered. "We go into the dark. Stay on my heels. If you see geometry that doesn't make sense, ignore it. Trust the compass and trust my lead." We ventured back out into the impossible landscape. The black obsidian structures now formed a terrifying, precise spiral, digging straight into the earth beside the Odyssey's ruined hull. It looked less like a geological feature and more like a massive, intentional wound in reality, drawing us into its depths. The descent was agonizing. The transition was immediate. The light changed from the pale desert dawn to an oppressive, deep emerald green, a subterranean sea. The air became thick, crystalline, stinging our lungs with every breath, tasting faintly of ozone and ancient stone. We were no longer on Earth. The geometry down here was completely fractured. We navigated corridors where the up and down felt relative. Stairs led up to a solid ceiling, then twisted back down onto themselves. Passageways spun in 4 dimensions, causing immediate, crippling vertigo. We had to move by touch and sound, focusing solely on the feel of the ground, relying on Lee's shouted, abstract directions: 3 steps right, then 140 degrees left on the bend. This was the domain of the true horrors. The deep, insectal forms were everywhere, silent and massive, covered in a layered shell that looked like rough, fossilized stone and polished, dark glass. They moved with a terrifying economy of motion. They communicated through violent, high-frequency psychic stabs that threatened to scramble our thoughts. They were clearly a defensive force, patrolling the deep tunnels. Reyes, carrying Elias, was almost lost in a corridor where the ceiling abruptly dropped to floor level. One of the stone-glass creatures lunged, moving faster than anything so massive should. I emptied a clip into its head. It was pointless. The rounds merely created sparks on its granite-like carapace. Reyes stumbled backward, trapped. The creature's segmented head snapped toward Elias. The boy, sensing the absolute danger, reached out a tiny hand and pressed it against Reyes's flak jacket. The creature instantly froze. Its stone-glass shell cracked with a sound like shattering ice, and it dissolved into a puff of salt and green dust. The anomaly is rejecting its own defenses. Lee yelled, grabbing my arm, her eyes shining with manic determination. The seed's power is flowing through him, prioritizing his immediate survival. We must keep this up. We are using the boy's fear as our weapon. The final stretch was a frantic race, running through non-Euclidean tunnels, relying on the quiet, 7-year-old child to subconsciously fight off the geometric horrors that pursued us. The choice was clear: use the anchor's power to survive long enough to sever the connection, or perish trying to contain the horror. The impossible spiral ended in a massive, naturally formed cavern. The space felt endless, echoing with the deep, sickening hum. The light was blinding, emanating from a single, impossible object suspended perfectly in the center, floating 10 feet off the ground. It was the seed. The object was obsidian black, football-sized, and covered in intricate, swirling symbols that looked like written concepts rather than a language. It pulsed with the entity's life force, drawing power from the cavern walls, warping the very air around it. And beneath the seed, resting innocently on the floor, was the source of our torment, a small, dented, consumer-grade satellite phone. It was still silently emitting the residual SOS signal. The Odyssey had been transporting this object, and the phone was the last human link, the initial power source sustaining the seed's terrifying manifestation and its subsequent connection to Elias. Guarding the seed were two enormous entities, the overseers. They were purely geometrical, floating spheres of shifting, hypercomplex patterns. They had no physical form, only gravitational presence, capable of crushing us with sheer density. They communicated directly into my mind, bypassing language, delivering a single, crushing message. The anchor must remain. The seed is ours. You will not disrupt the focus. Return to your non-existence. We couldn't fight them. I could feel the gravitational shift, my feet felt heavy, pinned to the floor. The only path was to break the connection, the anchor, between Elias and the seed. Lee, seeing the simplicity of the power source, pointed frantically at the satellite phone. The phone. Kane, it's the external energy. It's maintaining the initial focus. If we sever that broadcast, the seed loses its reason for this specific manifestation and might withdraw. I gave the order. Reyes, distract the overseers. Full barrage. Reyes, his face white with terror but his resolve unbreakable, took cover behind a piece of angular debris and laid down a desperate, full barrage of fire toward the overseers. The rounds vanished mid-air, absorbed by the overseer's gravitational field, but the distraction was momentary. Lee sprinted toward the seed, dodging the massive, invisible gravitational pulls that tried to tear her apart. The geometry of the room seemed to stretch and compress around her with every step. The boy, Elias, began to weep for the first time, a dry, terrible, guttural sound. He realized he was about to lose the source of comfort and the absolute power that had protected him from the trauma of the shipwreck and the horrors of the anomaly. The overseers, recognizing the true threat, ignored Reyes and focused their full, terrifying force on Lee. She screamed as her body began to twist, her bones folding into impossible, wrong angles, succumbing to the geometry of fear. But in her final, magnificent act of brilliant defiance, she launched a high-thermal plasma charge from her pack. It struck the satellite phone squarely. The phone exploded into shrapnel and a burst of meaningless, electronic static that echoed painfully in the massive cavern. For a terrifying, endless moment, the world hung suspended. Then, the seed did not vanish. It retracted. The obsidian surface folded inwards on itself with a sound like tearing sheet metal, a sound that felt like it was inside my head. The blinding light instantly faded, the oppressive emerald-green illumination vanished entirely, replaced by the faint, normal, dust-filtered light of the Syrian dawn, filtering down the tunnel. The overseers dissolved into silent, white dust, their gravitational pull abruptly vanishing. The connection was broken. Lee was gone. The final chapter was silent, punctuated only by the distant, steady thump-thump of the extraction chopper blades. We carried Elias out of the spiral, which had instantly reverted to a shallow, sandy pit, into a world where gravity, motion, and light worked correctly again. The impossible black structures had collapsed into inert, featureless dust. The Odyssey was a dead hulk on a dry salt flat, its impossible brackish water completely gone, leaving only cracked earth. Reyes and I staggered out, dragging Elias, who was now just a child in profound shock. The entity was gone, but it left deep, searing marks. We were 3 men returning where 4 had started. At the debriefing, Reyes and I maintained a heavily edited narrative: accidental friendly fire, Lee and Martinez, severe heatstroke, and a unique, localized chemical reaction that caused mass hallucinations. The command knew we were lying. The psychological report on Reyes's state alone was damning, but the physical evidence supported our fabricated tale: 2 missing men, a shell-shocked boy, and an utterly silent, deserted zone. They officially classified the entire event under Project Anchor and immediately closed the dead zone with sensor arrays and silent drone patrols. Elias was relocated to a quiet, isolated government facility, designated Subject E-7. He never spoke a word again, existing in a state of muted trauma. But he had retained a subtle, residual power from the seed. Whenever he was stressed or frightened, objects around him would subtly change. A picture frame might briefly tilt 10 degrees past vertical, a chair leg might momentarily elongate by an inch, small, geometric impossibilities that were easily dismissed as optical illusions by staff, but which proved the connection had not been fully severed. He was still the anchor, now frayed but intact. Reyes took a medical discharge immediately, unable to shake the constant, phantom smell of burning flesh that only he could detect, the smell of Lee's final, defiant sacrifice. He spent his retirement drawing endless, complex, impossible shapes on napkins, muttering about angles that felt right and the terror of 4 dimensions. He was broken, but he saved the world. I survived, and I commanded Ghost 6 for 2 more years. But I look at shadows and straight lines differently now. I know the terrible truth: there are things beneath the surface of reality that our minds are mercifully programmed to ignore. The true horror wasn't the geometry or the creatures, the horror was the intent, a vast, silent, cosmic consciousness that simply wanted to hold on to a small boy, and the terrifying, impossible lengths it would go to achieve that. My last official act before leaving the service was writing the final, unedited classified report on the incident, concluding with a chilling realization. The seed was now dormant, but it wasn't destroyed. It simply folded back in on itself, waiting, a knot in the fabric of space-time. It is still under the sands of Al-Khamis. And the next time a ship, or a man, or perhaps just a stray, frightened thought, travels too close to that spot, the seed will wake up. And the first thing it will do is look for its anchor.